The town of Elridge sat like a sore on the edge of the Black Range Mountains. The buildings leaned tiredly against the relentless sun. Dust hung in the air like judgment. By noon, the main street pulsed with the slow breath of heat and spite, and the people had gathered not for worship or war, but for something far more primal, a sale. Ruth Holloway stood at the center of it all, hands bound. Her auburn hair, once her pride, lay limp under a faded bonnet. She wore her late husband's debt like a second skin, and now it had come due. The auction block creaked as she stepped up, flanked by two deputies. The auctioneer's voice, slick with fake cheer, cut through the oppressive heat. One used woman, he tipped his hat, age 26, no children, no prospects, and a name no longer worth the ink it's written in. Laughter rippled through the cruel crowd. "She's barren," someone called out. "Colder than a snake's tit," another replied to roaring laughter. Ruth didn't flinch. Pride was all she had left. "On account of her late husband's outstanding gambling debts," the auctioneer continued, his eyes flicking to the smirking Reverend Fallon, "starting at $5. The silence swelled, suffocating. Ruth felt the heat close around her throat. Her palms were slick despite the dust. No hands rose. Her heart pounded. 3, 2, nothing. Just as the auctioneer sighed, about to drop the gavel, a voice cut through the heat like steel through hide. "I'll pay in silver, not shame." Heads turned. The laughter died. From the edge of the boardwalk, a man stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, his skin bronzed from sun and wind. Across his chest, a sling cradled a small baby, its head nestled against him like a secret. He held a worn leather pouch in one hand. $10 silver, he said. Murmurs spread like fire on prairie grass. "It's him," someone whispered. "Greyhawk." "Thomas Greyhawk," another corrected. "Used to run with the Lobo Ridge gang. Thought he was dead." The auctioneer's mouth opened, then closed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. 15, Thomas said. 20, he added, his voice quiet but firm. "That's final." The baby stirred, but did not cry. Ruth stared at the child. Blue eyes, soft dark hair. Too young to understand the transaction unfolding in front of him. "Sold," the auctioneer said at last, his voice cracking. Thomas approached the platform. He looked up at Ruth, his expression unreadable. "You're free to walk," he said. "I didn't buy a wife. I didn't buy a servant. Just thought maybe you need a way out." Ruth said nothing. Her throat tightened. "I have a place north of the Gila," he said. "It's quiet. You'll be safe there until you figure your next move. Or longer if you want." She studied him. His face bore scars, not fresh but deep lived in. He looked like someone who had buried people. Then he said, "My name's Thomas. This here is Eli. He don't like most folks, but he didn't cry when he saw you." The murmurings behind them rose again, hushed and hissing. She didn't know yet if he was a savior or a storm, but he hadn't looked at her like she was broken, and that was enough for now. The canyon swallowed the sun by mid-afternoon. Thomas said little during the ride. Ruth didn't press him. She sat stiffly in the wagon bed, her hands wrapped tight around the handle of her cracked leather satchel, her only possession. Baby Eli lay cradled in Thomas's arms, barely stirring. The air grew cooler as they wound deeper into the land, the dust giving way to pine and juniper. The place looked temporary, like something not built to last. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, opening the cabin door. "Or longer. That's your choice." Ruth stepped inside cautiously. The interior was cleaner than she expected, sparse but tended to. A cradle rested in the corner, carved with lines and symbols she didn't recognize. She watched as Thomas settled Eli into it. The baby stirred but didn't cry. "Does he ever cry?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "Only when I hold him." Later she asked, "Why did you buy me?" He looked up from unrolling his sleeping mat. "I didn't. You paid silver." He said, "I paid a debt to someone who ain't alive to collect." Ruth didn't know what that meant. She glanced at the cradle. Eli slept like a stone. There was something unsettling about how still he was. Not sick, but watchful, like the child was pretending not to see everything. That night sleep came late. Sometime after midnight, Eli cried. Not loud, but sharp and sudden. Ruth sat up. Tomas was already awake, trying to rock the baby. "He won't settle," he muttered. Before she could think better of it, Ruth stepped over. "Let me." He hesitated, then handed the baby over. The moment Eli touched her arms, he went quiet. Tomas stared at her. "He's never done that," he whispered. Ruth's heart was thumping. She didn't know what to do with the child, but her arms didn't want to let go. The next morning, while Thomas was chopping wood, Ruth explored the cabin. A pair of tiny shoes never worn, a book of stories in Spanish, and near the cradle, half hidden beneath a woven rug, something glinted, a silver pendant. The chain snapped, the locket smeared with dried blood. Her stomach twisted. She opened it. Inside, a miniature portrait of a woman, Apache features, Eli's mother. When Thomas returned, she didn't ask about the locket. Not yet. Instead, she studied the man. She knew he wasn't just a rancher. He knew how to live on the edge of maps, how to vanish, how to kill. "Who was she?" she asked. "Someone I owed," he said, "and someone I failed." Later, looking for a cup, she found a wooden box. Inside, beneath folded letters and old bullets, lay a crumpled piece of newspaper. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The ink was faded but legible. "Missing infant boy, blue eyes, pale skin, last seen near San Miguel outpost. Possible kidnapping suspected. Reward offered for safe return." She sat down hard. Eli. The silence. The distance. The locket. The blood. The child wasn't just a mystery. He was wanted. Wanted by someone powerful enough to post a bounty. Ruth looked over at the cradle. He was sleeping. Peaceful. Trusting. The noose around both their necks had just gotten tighter. 2 days after the locket and the newspaper, smoke rose in the distance. Tomas saw it first from the ridge, a thin gray stream against the morning sky like a scar. The wind carried the smell a moment later, burnt timber, scorched grain, and something darker. Flesh. "Knox," Thomas said flatly, "hit another ranch. Close. Too close." When he returned that evening, his face was grim. "They're dead?" Ruth asked. He nodded. Only thing left standing was a trough and a Bible, charred shut. The next day, Thomas doubled the patrol around the canyon's entrance. He set traps, sharpened tools, and checked the rifle powder. Ruth watched him from the porch, trying to keep her breath steady. Inside the barn, a calf had gotten tangled in barbed wire, bleeding from its foreleg. Ruth didn't call for Thomas. She moved in quietly and crouched beside it. She cleaned the wound, poured boiled whiskey over the gash, and tied it with strips torn from her petticoat. The calf shuddered but did not cry. Tomas found her brushing the animal later, her brow damp. "You've done this before," he said. "I grew up on a cotton ranch," she replied. "My father thought sons were too slow, so I learned everything he knew." "And your husband?" She paused. "He thought women should break easier." She looked up, her voice quiet. "The doctor never said I was barren. That was his word. After the second loss, he started sleeping outside. Called me cursed." Thomas said, "Some men measure worth by what they can own, not what they can carry." Later that afternoon, Thomas retrieved an old rifle from a storage chest. "Have you ever held one?" he asked, not looking up. "Not since my brother went off to war." He handed her the Winchester slowly. "Then it's time." They trained in the clearing. Ruth held the rifle like she was afraid of it, afraid of what it could make her become. Thomas stood behind her. "Breathe slow," he said. "Focus on the space between moments. That's where your shot lives." She squeezed the trigger. The bottle shattered. She did it again. And again. By sundown, her shoulder ached, but her heart felt strangely still. "I don't want to kill anyone," she said. "You don't have to," Tomas replied, "but I want you to have the choice." That night, Tomas retrieved a small box from beneath the floorboards. Inside lay a necklace, turquoise beads and a single hawk feather. "It was my sister's," he said. "She was younger, braver, the kind who would sing in a thunderstorm." Ruth held the necklace gently. "She used to say, 'Every woman deserves something beautiful that can't be taken away.'" The knock came just past midnight. Thomas rose, rifle in hand. Ruth clutched Eli, her body already moving toward the rear exit. Wait! Thomas raised a hand. Another knock. Then a voice. Greyhawk, this is Sheriff Maddox. Open the damn door. Well, well, Maddox drawled, a crooked grin on his face. Beside him stood a wiry man in a preacher's coat. Fallon, ain't this a sweet little setup? Out here playing house. What do you want? Thomas asked. Just paying a courtesy call, Maddox said. Word is there's a stolen baby out this way. Blue eyes, about 6 months old. No one's stolen, Tomas said flatly. Fallon stepped forward. You harbor a woman cursed by God and a child claimed by justice. That makes you an enemy of both. I've got no patience for sermons, Tomas snapped. Then listen to law, Maddox said. I got a warrant. Says the boy belongs to the Blake family in Santa Fe. Missing since April. Ruth stepped forward. He doesn't even have a name on record. How would you? Don't matter, Fallon interrupted. God's already written this story. You're just trying to erase the ink. Maddox's grin widened. We'll be back in 3 days. With men. Unless you decide to make things easy. Thomas didn't move until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Ruth. We have 3 days to vanish, he said. Ruth didn't blink. No, she said. We have 3 days to stand. The wind that morning came hot and dry. Ruth stood outside the cabin, Eli cradled against her hip, while Tomas tightened straps on the horse's saddle. Inside her apron pocket, tucked tight like a secret too heavy to hold, was a letter she hadn't expected to find. It was in the lining of the satchel she'd carried from town, stitched by a different hand. The letter was addressed to James Holloway, her late husband. We leave for Santa Fe before the week is out. The boy has your eyes. Ruth read the note 3 times before the truth took form, slow and cruel. Eli wasn't just any child. He was family. Her husband had another life, another woman, another home. And now that woman was dead. The truth wasn't just a blade. It was the kind that turned in the wound. She confronted Thomas that evening. You knew, she said. Thomas didn't ask what she meant. I found the letter, the one in the satchel. Thomas's jaw flexed. I didn't know the name until I read it. After it was over. Did you know she was with my husband? Ruth asked, her voice shaking. No, he said. Not until the baby came. By then, it was too late. Tell me the truth, all of it. He placed Eli carefully into the cradle before facing her. It was supposed to be a raid, he said quietly. Just supplies, some food. We were desperate. The winter had turned cruel. Ruth listened, fists trembling at her sides. She came out holding the baby, Thomas continued. I told them to stop. I told them she wasn't a threat. But one of the men fired. She stepped in front of the boy. His voice cracked. She died protecting him. And I held her hand when she went. And you took him, she whispered. I buried her with my own hand, he said. I tried to bring him to the fort, but the soldiers weren't going to take an Apache man holding a pale baby. They would have shot us both. The silence was a canyon all its own. Ruth turned toward the door. He's not mine, she said. He's my husband's bastard. He's not a bastard, Thomas said. Not after all you've done for him. That was the worst part. She didn't hate the child. She loved him. She loved him like something pulled from under her ribs. But the betrayal coiled inside her like a snake in the dark. You expect me to forgive? She asked. No, Thomas said. I expect you to walk away if you need to, but I won't stop protecting him. The next morning, she found him outside packing supplies into saddlebags. What are you doing? She asked. He didn't look at her. I'm going to turn myself in. To Maddox. To whoever will keep the boy safe. They'll hang you, she said. I deserve worse. No, she said. You don't. He finally met her gaze. You saved him, she whispered. You raised him. That makes you his father. Thomas looked away, jaw clenched. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the turquoise necklace he'd given her. I'm not letting you ride off and die alone, she said. You said your sister used to sing in storms. Then maybe we fight this one together. Thomas stared at the necklace, then at her. For the first time, he looked like he believed in something again. They spent the day fortifying the canyon. Tomas dug defensive trenches. Ruth loaded bullets, her hands shaking only at first. They placed Eli's cradle in the root cellar just in case. That evening, Ruth braided her hair back. Thomas tied a black strip of cloth around his wrist, a piece of his sister's dress. They didn't speak much. They'd chosen their side. Just past dusk, Ruth stepped outside to fetch water. The moon had risen, and then she saw it, a shadow moving where there shouldn't have been any. It was Marble Carter. Ruth's breath hitched. Marble was talking to someone, pointing, a lean man, hat pulled low, rifle slung across his back. Ruth backed up, heart pounding. She ran. Inside the cabin, she slammed the door. Thomas turned sharply, pistol in hand. "They're coming," she gasped. "Tonight. She led them here." "Who?" "Marble," Ruth spat. "The woman who sold me once. Now she's come to finish the job." Thomas cursed. "Knox." Ruth grabbed Eli from the cradle and wrapped him in a blanket. "We don't have time." Thomas threw open a chest and pulled out a second rifle, tossing it to her. "We hold the ridge," and he said. "If we can survive till morning, Maddox might just get here in time to clean up the mess." She raised the rifle. "Then let's make it a mess worth cleaning." Outside, the first echo of hooves thundered through the canyon. Dust rose, and with it, war. Moonlight spilled silver across the dusty ground. The canyon walls loomed like watchful giants, shadows dancing in the flicker of torches. Thomas leaned against a fence post, rifle in hand, breathing shallow. His face was smeared with dirt and sweat. Eli, wrapped tightly in a blanket, slept in the cradle. Ruth moved quietly, loading extra cartridges, tightening leather straps on Thomas's leg from an earlier wound. The attack had come. The first shots cracked through the night. Rifles and revolvers echoed off stone. Thomas fired back, his leg buckling. He hobbled for cover behind stacked crates. Ruth saw Marble's silhouette on the ridge, directing riders. Knox's gang surged forward, torches held high. Ruth crouched by the porch, rifle aimed, breath held. She squeezed the trigger. One rider fell. Another shouted. A torch dropped, lighting dry grass. Fire hissed. Tomas braced himself to move, but a bullet hit his shoulder. He gasped, dropping his rifle. Blood darkened his shirt. Ruth's heart clamped. She knew they couldn't hold much longer. Thomas was weakened. Horsemen were circling. If they breached the barn wall, Eli would be at risk. Desperate, she grabbed Eli close to her chest, wrapped in the blanket, and mounted Thomas's horse. Teeth set, whipcord tense. The smell of gunpowder lingered in her nostrils. She kicked the horse forward toward Elridge, toward the heart of shame, toward Sheriff Maddox's office. Torches bobbed behind her. Horse hooves pounded dust clouds into the moonlight. She rode like someone with nothing left to lose. Each heartbeat thundered Eli against her chest. By the time she reached town, the saloon doors were locked, windows shuttered. Townsfolk shook behind lace curtains. "Maddox!" she yelled. The sheriff's office lamp was lit. Ruth didn't wait. She kicked the door open. Inside, Maddox sat at his desk, ledger open. Fallon knelt beside him, a Bible in his lap. Ruth threw herself forward, blanket parted. Eli's eyes were wide open. "He's wanted," she said, her voice cracking. "You said you had a warrant. Why haven't you done something about it?" Maddox looked up, troubled. "This isn't the time." "This is the time," Ruth snarled. "He's here. You either arrest Knox's gang tonight, or I'll spread the truth of your corruption until Elridge sees you for what you are." Knox's riders lit torches at the edge of town. Townsfolk emerged, drawn by the shouting. Some carried lanterns, others braces, others suspicion. "Knox's gang has no claim," Ruth's voice rang out. "There is a justice not for sale." It was late, past midnight, when the sheriff's posse finally arrived. A few brave neighbors joined them. Horses stamped under the moonglow. Maddox, trembling, led them into the night toward the hillside ridge where Knox's riders regrouped. Gunfire flared once more. Thomas, bleeding, stood tall by the barn door. Ruth arrived from town with her makeshift allies, Eli trembling in her arm, safe now. She placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Steady. Sure. Knox emerged, riding hard. Torches lifted shadows. Knives gleamed. "You think law can reach me here?" Maddox raised his arm. "By the law, Caleb Knox, you are under arrest for arson, assault, kidnapping, and murder. Knox laughed, raising his revolver. A shot rang out. Ruth raised her rifle and fired. The bullet took Knox's weapon hand. The revolver dropped. Riders halted. Several dropped beside him. In the chaos, Marble stood frozen at the edge of the ridge, her eyes wide. She tried to run, but townsmen behind her blocked the path. She had betrayed them. Now she faced their justice. The surrender was swift. With their leader disarmed and surrounded, Knox's men threw down their weapons. Ruth stood beside Thomas. Eli held close. She hadn't been sold. She hadn't been broken. She had been chosen. And in that choice, she found a love she never expected. For a boy who wasn't her blood, and for a man who wasn't her husband. But they were family. They were home. The next day, Thomas and Ruth rode into town. Not as outlaws, not as a widow and her owner, but as a family. Maddox, shaken and humbled, offered his apologies. The town looked at Ruth with new eyes. She was no longer a used woman. She was the one who faced down a gang and saved them all. She was a hero. Thomas looked at her as they rode, a soft smile on his face. She had stood strong. She had fought. And what about Fallon, the reverend who cursed her in her womb? His church was found boarded up and empty. He had fled. He was another kind of coward, one who ran from the light. Ruth and Thomas returned to their home in the canyon, a home built not just of logs and stone, but of choice and courage. And Eli? He grew up with a father who loved him and a mother who chose him. He grew up on a land where debts were not written on paper, but paid in courage and loyalty. If this story stirred something in your chest, if it reminded you that family isn't always about who shares your blood, but who shares your heart, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more stories out there just waiting to be told.